The Kansas sky had always felt endless to Jessica Miller. It stretched so wide and blue that even as a child, she believed it could swallow her whole. When other kids ran through fields chasing grasshoppers, Jessica chased shadows, the dark silhouettes of jets that streaked across the clouds, leaving thin white scars in their wake. Every Sunday, when her father took her to the airfield outside Wichita, she'd press her hands against the cold chain-link fence and watch the planes roar into the horizon. The noise rattled her bones, but it made her heart race. That thunder, she thought, was what freedom sounded like. Her father, an old mechanic, would smile at her fascination. "Engines are honest," he used to say. "They give back exactly what you put in. Respect them, and they'll never fail you." Jessica took that to heart. She was 12 when she first took apart a lawnmower engine just to see how it worked. At 16, she rebuilt it better than before. But what she truly wanted wasn't to fix engines. It was to fly one. She wanted to be up there, above everything, where the wind and the world met. When she told her high school counselor she wanted to be a fighter pilot, the woman smiled politely and said, "That's a big dream, Jessica. Maybe you should look into something more practical. Aircraft mechanics, perhaps?" That word mechanic would follow her for years. After graduation, Jessica made a decision that surprised everyone in her small town. Instead of college, she enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. Her parents supported her, though her mother cried quietly the day she left. "Just promise me one thing," her mother said at the bus station. "Don't lose who you are up there." Jessica hugged her tightly. "I'll find out who I'm supposed to be." Basic training was a shock to her system. She wasn't used to being yelled at, pushed past exhaustion, or treated like she didn't belong. But every time she struggled, she pictured the sky, that endless Kansas blue, and it pushed her forward. When the assignments were announced, her heart hammered in anticipation. She wanted to hear the words pilot training. Instead, her name appeared beside a different designation: aircraft maintenance, tactical operations. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Then reality settled in. She wouldn't be flying jets. She'd be fixing them. The disappointment hit like a punch. But Jessica wasn't the type to give up easily. "If I can't fly them yet," she whispered to herself, "I'll learn everything about them until I can." Her first posting was at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, home to the legendary A-10 Thunderbolt II, better known as the Warthog. The first time she saw one in person, she froze. The A-10 wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense. It was rugged, ugly even, with its snub nose, broad wings, and twin engines mounted like fists behind the cockpit. But there was something fierce and alive about it. "Welcome to your new best friend," joked her supervisor, Sergeant Clay Henderson, handing her a clipboard. "You'll be turning wrenches on these beasts until you drop." Jessica smiled, though the words stung. The work was tough. Long shifts in the scorching Arizona heat, her uniform soaked in oil and sweat. She scraped her knuckles on metal panels, inhaled jet fuel, and learned the unique quirks of every aircraft. The A-10s weren't just machines to her. They were personalities. One had a stubborn fuel pump, another a temperamental targeting pod. At night, while others went out drinking, Jessica stayed behind in the hangar. She'd sit cross-legged beneath an aircraft, flashlight in hand, reading through flight manuals and wiring schematics. She wanted to understand the jet from the inside out, every bolt, every sensor, every heartbeat of its titanium armor. The other maintainers respected her skill, but the pilots barely noticed her. They'd stroll past in their flight suits, laughing and slapping each other's backs, never once looking her way. To them, she was invisible, just maintenance. Sometimes she'd watch them climb into their cockpits, flip switches, and roar into the sky. The thunder of takeoff filled her chest, but instead of joy, it brought an ache, that hollow feeling of watching someone else live your dream. One afternoon, a pilot returned from a sortie, complaining about sluggish controls. Jessica was assigned to inspect the plane. Hours later, she found a hairline crack in a hydraulic line that everyone else had missed. If it had gone unnoticed, it could have caused catastrophic failure mid-flight. She reported it quietly, expecting acknowledgement. Instead, her supervisor just nodded and said, "Good catch, Miller. Now grab a new line from storage." No medal. No ceremony. Just another job done. But she didn't need applause. Deep down, she knew what she'd prevented. A life had been saved because she'd paid attention. That night, sitting alone under the hangar lights, Jessica looked up at the massive gray silhouette of the A-10 and whispered, "One day, I'll be up there." "You'll see." Her reputation grew among the crew, precise, reliable, unshakable under pressure. Yet every time she hinted at wanting to fly, people laughed it off. "You're good with tools," Sergeant Henderson told her. "Not everyone's built for the cockpit." "I just want the chance," she replied. He shrugged. "Chances like that aren't handed out, Miller. Especially not to someone like you." The words lingered long after he left. Someone like you. What did that even mean? A woman? A mechanic? Someone who didn't fit the mold? That night, Jessica sat in her bunk, laptop open, researching how to become a pilot. The process was brutal. She'd need to apply for officer training school, pass a battery of physical and mental exams, and compete against candidates with perfect academic and flight backgrounds. But the idea thrilled her. For the first time in years, she saw a path, narrow, difficult, but real. The next morning, she walked into the personnel office and submitted her application. Weeks passed. Every day she'd check her inbox, heart pounding. Then one afternoon, the email arrived. Subject: OTS application status message. "We regret to inform you that your application has not been selected at this time." Jessica stared at the screen. The words blurred. Her throat tightened. That night, she didn't go to the hangar. She didn't study manuals or clean tools. She sat on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd been foolish to dream so high. But giving up wasn't in her nature. The next morning, she tied her hair back, laced her boots, and went to work like nothing happened. When the jets roared overhead, she looked up and whispered, "Not yet." Because Jessica Miller, the girl who loved the sky, had learned one thing from turning wrenches and tightening bolts. Sometimes, the machine doesn't start on the first try. Sometimes you've got to fix it, try again, and trust that the engine, like the dream, will roar to life when it's ready. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the grit, oil, and exhaustion, a voice whispered back, "You were never just maintenance." The Arizona sun beat down on the flight line like a furnace. Heat shimmered off the concrete, distorting the outlines of the A-10s parked in neat gray rows. Jessica Miller wiped sweat from her forehead, streaking a black line of oil across her skin. Her coveralls were soaked, her hair pulled into a fraying bun, but her eyes steady, sharp, unflinching, missed nothing. "Hydraulic line check complete," she called, tapping her wrench twice against the fuselage. "Copy that, Miller," came Sergeant Clay Henderson's voice from behind the clipboard. He didn't look up. He never did. "Move on to the fuel system." Jessica grabbed her tools, nodding silently. She'd long learned that her words rarely mattered here. What mattered were the numbers she logged, the hours she worked, and how quickly she could make a war machine ready to fly again. Around her, the other maintainers joked, cursed, and wiped grease off their arms. The air smelled of fuel and sunburn. Music from someone's small speaker mixed with the roar of taxiing engines. It was chaos, but to Jessica, it was rhythm metallic, mechanical music. She loved these aircraft more than she cared to admit. Every A-10 had its personality. Some were stubborn on startup, others roared like wild beasts. She knew their quirks better than she knew most people. When she laid her hand on the cold titanium skin of one, she could feel the hum of life beneath it, the same aircraft she once dreamed of commanding. The pilots came and went, their flight suits crisp, their boots clean, their smiles easy. They always seemed larger than life, swaggering, confident, living gods of the sky. Yet to Jessica, they were strangers. They never looked twice at the maintainers, unless something broke. Once, a pilot dropped his helmet beside her while checking his pre-flight sheet. She handed it back to him. "You missed a coolant line, sir," she said, pointing to the panel. He smirked. "That's why we've got you folks." Then he winked. "You keep her running. We keep her flying." She forced a polite nod. But inside, she felt that familiar sting, the reminder that she belonged to the ground, not the sky. That night, after shift, she stayed in the hangar long after the others clocked out. The lights dimmed overhead, and the vast space echoed with the distant hum of generators. Jessica climbed onto the wing of an idle A-10, her favorite one-tail number 347. She sat cross-legged, staring through the open canopy. The cockpit glowed faintly in the low light, rows of buttons, screens, and switches she'd memorized by sight, but never touched in flight. She ran her hand over the throttle and whispered, "Someday." Below her, the radio crackled faintly from the maintenance office. She ignored it and opened a folded piece of paper she kept tucked in her pocket, copy of the A-10 Flight Systems Manual. She'd been reading it page by page, line by line, after every shift. To anyone else, it was pointless. But to Jessica, it was preparation. A week later, during an early morning inspection, something happened that changed how people saw her, if only a little. A pilot named Lieutenant Adams complained about a sluggish roll during flight. Jessica was assigned to check the hydraulics. Everyone expected it to be routine, but Jessica noticed something strange, tiny, almost invisible bubbles in the fluid line. A sign of a microfracture. She called it out to Sergeant Henderson. "It's fine, Miller. Pressure readings are stable," he said, waving it off. But she frowned. "Sir, it's not fine. That line could fail under stress. We need to replace it." Henderson sighed, already irritated. "We've got 10 birds to clear today. Just sign it off." Jessica hesitated. Her pen hovered over the checklist. She could sign it and move on like everyone else, or she could speak up. She took a breath. "Sergeant, with respect, I can't sign off on something that might kill a pilot." He turned slowly, jaw tight. Around them, the crew went quiet. "All right, Miller," he said finally. "Do it your way. But if this bird misses a sortie, it's on you." Jessica nodded and got to work. It took hours under the sun, sweat pouring, hands cramping, but she replaced the entire line. The next day, that same aircraft flew a low-level training mission. Mid-air turbulence hit hard, and the pilot later reported a massive pressure spike that nearly blew the old line. Her fix had saved the aircraft, and probably the man flying it. Word spread quietly around the maintenance bay. People started nodding to her in the mornings. A few even clapped her on the shoulder. But Henderson never mentioned it again. To him, it was just another day, another repair. Later that evening, Jessica sat in the break room, sipping black coffee. A few of the guys were talking about new recruits. "Can you believe we got another girl coming next week?" One of them laughed. "Probably here for the uniform." Jessica stared into her cup, biting her tongue. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "Funny, that's what they said about me." The room went silent for a moment. Then one of them, the youngest, said, "Yeah, and you work harder than all of us." She looked up, surprised. He grinned. "You proved him wrong, Miller. Everyone knows it." It was a small thing, but for Jessica, it meant everything. That night, after curfew, she climbed onto the hangar roof. The desert air was cool, stars bright and infinite. She lay back against the metal and watched the sky. Somewhere up there, pilots streaked through the night, chasing targets, living the dream she still chased. She whispered to the stars, "I'm coming." It wasn't a wish anymore. It was a promise. Weeks turned to months. Jessica's skills became legendary on base. When something broke that no one else could figure out, they called her. She could listen to an engine and tell what was wrong before anyone hooked up diagnostics. She was faster, sharper, more precise. And yet, every time a jet lifted off, she still felt that ache. Maintenance doesn't fly, she'd hear from somewhere behind her. But she didn't argue anymore. She didn't need to. Instead, she started training secretly. After hours, she used the flight simulator in the training wing, sneaking in when no one was watching. She borrowed manuals, studied aerodynamics, and trained her reflexes on old computer programs. Her technical background gave her an edge. She could visualize airflow, stress loads, and engine response in ways most couldn't. One night, Sergeant Henderson caught her in the simulator. "What do you think you're doing?" He barked. She froze, then turned slowly. "Practicing, sir." "For what?" She met his eyes. "For the sky." He laughed, shaking his head. "Miller, you're good. Damn good. But don't waste your time dreaming. People like you don't fly the hog." Her jaw tightened. "People like me? You know what I mean. You're maintenance. You fix things. Leave the flying to the pilots." Jessica said nothing. She simply powered down the simulator, saluted, and walked past him. He never saw the tears she wiped away once she was alone. But the fire inside her didn't fade. It only burned hotter. She'd proven she could keep an A10 alive. Now she was going to prove she could make one dance. That night, she filled out her second application for officer training school. And this time, she didn't just submit it. She prayed over it. Because she wasn't applying to escape her job. She was applying to become what she was always meant to be. Not just maintenance. A pilot. A hog driver. A woman who would take the sky by storm, one engine, one dream, one heartbeat at a time. The rejection letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Jessica had just finished a 12-hour night shift when the email notification pinged on her phone. Her eyes were heavy, her hands still smudged with oil, but the subject line jolted her awake. OTS application status. Her thumb hesitated before opening it. For a brief second, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe this time, maybe the universe would finally meet her halfway. Then she read the first sentence. "We regret to inform you that your application has not been selected at this time." The words blurred together. She read them again, slower, but they didn't change. Her chest felt hollow. The sound of hangar doors, clanging in the distance, faded into silence. She'd worked harder than anyone. She'd studied every spare minute, memorized aircraft systems, aced physical tests, and poured her entire heart into that application. But to the selection board, she was still just maintenance. Jessica locked her phone, shoved it into her pocket, and forced herself to keep working. The jets didn't care about dreams. They only cared about being fixed. That evening, the base cafeteria buzzed with the usual noise, laughter, trays clattering, and the hum of tired voices. Jessica sat alone at a corner table, pushing cold mashed potatoes around her plate. Across the room, a group of pilots were laughing loudly about a training exercise gone wrong. Their voices felt miles away. Sergeant Henderson walked by, tray in hand. He stopped when he saw her. You all right, Miller? She gave a small shrug. Fine, sir. He nodded slowly, sitting across from her. Heard back from your application? Yeah. She forced a smile. Didn't make it. He sighed, almost sympathetically. Don't take it too hard. You're good at what you do. Not everyone's built for the cockpit. Jessica's smile faded. You mean I'm not built for it? He lifted his tray and stood. I mean, there's nothing wrong with knowing your lane. When he walked away, she sat there for a long time, staring at her uneaten food. Her lane. 2 words that felt like a cage. That night, she went to the hangar after lights out. The desert wind howled through the open bay doors, sweeping sand across the floor. The A-10s sat silent, hulking shadows against the moonlight. She climbed onto the wing of her favorite jet, tail number 347, and sat there under the stars. The rejection hurt more than she wanted to admit. Not because she'd failed, but because no one had ever believed she could succeed in the first place. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Engines are honest. They give back exactly what you put in. She whispered, and maybe I'm just putting my effort in the wrong direction. That's when she heard footsteps. She turned, startled. A woman in a flight suit stood below the wing, helmet tucked under her arm. She looked to be in her mid-30s, confident and calm, with short auburn hair and eyes that had seen the sky from above. Couldn't sleep either? The woman asked, her voice carrying a wry smile. Jessica blinked. You're Captain Simmons, right? A 10 squadron? Guilty. The captain set her helmet down and leaned against the ladder. You're Miller, the mechanic who caught that hydraulic fracture a few months back. Jessica's eyes widened. You heard about that? I make it a point to know the people who keep me alive. The words hit Jessica like sunlight through clouds. They talked for nearly an hour that night. Captain Lavra Simmons wasn't what Jessica expected. She wasn't distant or unapproachable like most officers. She listened. She asked questions. She wanted to know why Jessica wanted to fly, what drove her, what she'd done to prepare. When Jessica admitted she'd been rejected from OTS twice, Lavra tilted her head thoughtfully. Do you know why? Because I'm not an engineer or a physics major. Because I'm maintenance. Because, she hesitated, because I'm not who they picture in a flight suit. Lavra smiled faintly. Neither was I. Jessica frowned. You too? Oh, I had plenty of people tell me I couldn't. Even my first instructor said, You're too soft for the hog? Jessica couldn't help but grin. And what did you do? Laura's eyes gleamed. I flew harder, louder, meaner, until nobody dared say it again. From that night forward, Lavra became more than a superior. She became a mentor. She started inviting Jessica to training sessions, letting her observe simulator runs, and even teaching her the basics of navigation, targeting, and flight physics after hours. Jessica soaked up everything like oxygen. Her notebooks filled with equations, diagrams, and handwritten reminders. Energy management equals survival. Trim before you trust the stick. Always fly the wing, never the ego. One afternoon, Lavra handed her a small patch, the A-10 insignia, a fierce-looking warthog with tusks. Keep it, Lavra said. You'll earn the real one soon enough. Jessica turned the patch over in her hand, tracing the edges with her thumb. What if I never get in? Then you'll still know more about this aircraft than half the people who do, Lavra said. But something tells me that's not how your story ends. Months passed. Jessica redoubled her efforts. She trained harder than anyone, running before dawn, studying after shifts, pushing herself through exhaustion. Her fellow mechanics started calling her Machine Miller because she never seemed to stop. Even Henderson noticed the change. One morning, as she climbed under a wing, he muttered, You're going to burn yourself out at this rate. She looked up from her wrench. Then at least I'll burn doing something that matters. He didn't respond. But that night, he left a sealed envelope on her tool bench, her third application packet, fully signed and endorsed by his office. Inside was a sticky note with 2 words, "Good luck." When the interview date arrived, Jessica was ready. She walked into the room in her pressed uniform, hair neat, posture straight, eyes sharp. Across the table sat 3 officers, all men, reviewing her file. One of them, a colonel, leaned back and said, "You've been maintenance your whole career. What makes you think you can handle flight school?" Jessica met his gaze without flinching. "Because I already understand what's at stake. I've held the lives of pilots in my hands every day. I've learned what failure costs, and I don't intend to fail." The colonel raised an eyebrow. "And what will you do if we say no again?" She smiled. "Then I'll apply again. And again. Until you run out of rejection letters." The room went silent for a beat. And the colonel chuckled softly. "Confidence. I like it." 2 weeks later, another email arrived. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "Congratulations, Airman Jessica Miller. You have been selected for Officer Training School, Class of 2014. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She read it again, slower this time, afraid it would vanish. Then she laughed, a sound half joy, half disbelief. She ran to the flight line, still in her coveralls, waving her phone like a madwoman. The other maintainers looked up, confused, until she shouted, "I got in." The hangar erupted. Even the ones who doubted her clapped and cheered. Someone handed her a wrench. Another shouted, "Guess you won't be needing that anymore, Miller." She grinned, raising it like a trophy. For the first time, the ground didn't feel like home. That night, she met Laura in the simulator room. "You did it," Laura said, pride glinting in her eyes. Jessica's voice trembled. "I did it." Laura clasped her shoulder. "Remember this moment, Miller. You earned it with grease, grit, and guts. But flight school, that's a different battlefield. They'll test everything, your body, your mind, your will." "I know." "Good. Then go show them what just maintenance can do." Jessica smiled through tears. "Yes, ma'am." Outside, the night sky stretched wide and boundless. The same Kansas blue she dreamed of as a child, now painted in starlight. She looked up, feeling something shift inside her. For years, she'd been fixing wings. Now, she was finally going to earn her own. The Alabama sun was relentless. Even at 7 a.m., the heat shimmered over the tarmac like molten glass. Jessica stood in formation with 50 other officer candidates, sweat trickling down the back of her neck. Her heart thudded against her ribs, not from the physical strain, but from the electric awareness that her life had just split into before and after. This was Maxwell Air Force Base, home of Officer Training School, the place where dreamers either rose to the rank of officer or broke trying. Eyes front, barked a voice. Lieutenant Hargrove strode down the line, a towering figure with mirrored sunglasses and the posture of a man who ate fear for breakfast. "Welcome to OTS, ladies and gentlemen. For the next 9 weeks, you will eat, breathe, and sleep the Air Force. Your past doesn't matter. I don't care if you are a mechanic, a cook, or the president's favorite child. You start at 0. Understand?" "Yes, sir," the formation shouted. Jessica's voice joined theirs, firm, steady, but inside she was trembling. The days blurred together. 4:30 a.m. wake-ups, endless drills, lectures on leadership and discipline, and the constant hum of orders. Jessica had been through tough before, but this was something else. It wasn't just physical, it was psychological warfare. They broke you down so they could rebuild you. And some days, she wasn't sure she'd survive the breaking. At night, when the barracks finally fell silent, she lay staring at the ceiling, whispering to herself, "You belong here. You earned this." But sometimes the old voices crept in, the laughter from the hangar, the words "just maintenance," echoing like ghosts. She clenched her jaw and forced herself to picture the A-10, her warthog, soaring through clouds. That vision was her anchor. Weeks passed. Jessica began to adapt. Her inspection reports were flawless, her academics top tier, her endurance improving. But her confidence was fragile, easily cracked by moments like the one that happened during a leadership exercise. Each cadet was assigned a command task. Jessica's team was supposed to coordinate a field repair simulation under time pressure. When she took charge, one male cadet, Rivers, rolled his eyes. "Miller, with all due respect," he said, "you might know how to turn a wrench, but this is about decision-making, not maintenance." The group chuckled. Jessica froze for a heartbeat, the sting immediate. Then something inside her hardened. "Then maybe you should listen to the one person here who's actually done it under pressure," she said evenly. "While the rest of you are practicing hand signals, I was replacing live flight control actuators in 110-degree heat. You want efficiency? Follow my lead." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then Rivers gave a slow nod. "Yes, ma'am." They finished the exercise with record time, the only team to score full marks. Afterward, their instructor quietly told Jessica, "That's leadership, cadet. You didn't just give orders, you earned them." By graduation, she was exhausted but stronger than she'd ever been. When they pinned her officer's bars on her shoulders, the weight of them nearly made her knees buckle. She'd made it. But it wasn't over. It was only the start. Her orders arrived 2 weeks later. Columbus Air Force Base, Mississippi. Undergraduate pilot training. The letter made her hands shake. This was the battlefield she dreamed of. Flight training was brutal, a world where mistakes weren't measured in red ink, but in survival odds. Every candidate was hungry, brilliant, competitive. They called it the gauntlet, and the instructors took pride in reminding them that statistically, nearly a third wouldn't make it to the end. Jessica arrived early on her first day, standing beneath a row of T-6 Texan II trainers, sleek, white and blue aircraft gleaming under the morning sun. An instructor with a buzz cut and a Texas drawl walked by, giving her a quick glance. "You, Miller?" "Yes, sir." He checked his clipboard. "Prior maintenance, huh?" "Yes, sir." He smirked. "Interesting. Let's see if the wrench turner can keep her lunch down in the air." She didn't respond. She'd learned that the best way to silence doubters wasn't with words, it was with results. The first few weeks were a blur of theory, safety protocols, and simulator time. The simulators looked like enclosed pods filled with panels, switches, and digital skies. Jessica spent every spare minute inside one, memorizing procedures, checklist flows, and radio calls. Still, the real test came the day she took her first flight. The canopy sealed above her, like the lid of destiny. The instructor sat behind her, calm and unreadable. "Call sign?" he asked. She hesitated. "Maintenance." He chuckled. "You sure you want to be known as that?" "Yes, sir," she said, gripping the stick. "Because that's what everyone said I was. Let's see what else I can be." The T-6 roared to life, propeller slicing the humid air. As they climbed through the clouds, Jessica's fear melted into something wild and powerful. For the first time, she wasn't just looking at the sky, she was part of it. Every movement demanded precision. Every correction carried consequence. But she was ready. "Level off at 5,000, the instructor said. She eased the throttle, adjusted the pitch, and felt the aircraft respond like a living thing. "Good," he said. "You've got a light touch." Jessica smiled behind her mask. Been fixing these things long enough to know how they like to be handled. He laughed. I'll give you that. By the time they landed, she was drenched in sweat, but exhilarated. The instructor stepped out first, clapped her on the shoulder, and said simply, "You've got potential, Miller. Keep it clean and don't let confidence turn into cockiness." Yes, sir. That night, she lay in her bunk, still feeling the hum of the engine in her bones. It wasn't perfect. She'd made small mistakes, missed radio calls, minor drift on turns, but none of it mattered, because she had flown. But as the weeks wore on, the pressure built. Every test flight, every evaluation came with the unspoken threat. One major mistake, and you're done. She watched friends wash out, one after another, faces she'd studied with, sweated with, vanish from the flight room without a word. Rivers, her old rival, barely passed his instrument check ride. Jessica's came next. It was a nightmare scenario. Low visibility, heavy turbulence, and radio interference. Her hands trembled, her eyes darting between gauges. Focus, her instructor's voice crackled through the headset. She exhaled slowly, remembering Lavra Simmons' words, "Fly the wing, not the ego." When she landed, her instructor was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. Textbook recovery. You kept your head. That's rare. Jessica swallowed the lump in her throat. Thank you, sir. He scribbled something on his clipboard. I don't say this often, Lieutenant Miller, but you're starting to look like a pilot. That night, after everyone had left, Jessica stood alone on the flight line. The T6 South glowed faintly under floodlights, their canopies reflecting the stars. She ran her hand over the fuselage of her assigned aircraft and whispered, I'm getting closer. In the distance, thunder rolled, a storm brewing over the Mississippi horizon. It felt fitting, because she could feel her next battle coming, the A-10 track assignment. Only the top students got it, and everyone wanted it. She closed her eyes, picturing the warthog again, that ugly, magnificent beast she'd once only dreamed of touching. Now she was one step away from flying it. And nothing, not the doubt, not the history, not the odds, was going to stop her. The first time Jessica saw an A-10 up close again, it hit her like a memory she wasn't ready for. The aircraft stood under the Arizona sun at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, thick-skinned, scarred, and utterly defiant. The same aircraft she had once cleaned, repaired, and whispered to in the hangar. But now, she wasn't there to fix it. She was there to fly it. Her hand brushed along the titanium armor plating. Hey there, Hog, she murmured, her voice soft with reverence. You remember me? Behind her, a voice interrupted. Careful talking to them, Lieutenant. People will start thinking you're crazy. Jessica turned to see a man in a flight suit leaning against the ladder, grinning. His name tag read Cap D. Keller. Maybe I am, she said with a grin of her own. Guess I caught it from the pilots I used to fix for. Keller laughed. Fair enough. You ready for the ride of your life? Jessica looked up at the gray beast. Twin engines, straight wings, a snout built around a cannon, and nodded. I've been ready for years. Training for the A-10 Thunderbolt II was nothing like flight school. It was survival school in disguise. The instructors at the 56th Fighter Wing didn't care about your background, your story, or your ambition. All they cared about was performance, raw, unflinching, measurable performance. Up there, the lead instructor, Major Rourke, said on the first day, nobody gives a damn about your dreams. You either fly the mission, or you don't come home. The A-10 doesn't forgive, and neither do I. The room went silent. Jessica sat upright, every nerve alert. The A-10 had been called ugly by design, slow, heavy, outdated, but she knew better. Beneath its brute appearance was poetry. Its engines could take hits and keep running. Its titanium armor could shrug off fire that would shred any other plane. It wasn't graceful, but it was unstoppable. Just like her. The first few weeks tested her to the edge. Each sortie was a war against the limits of her body and mind. Low-altitude flight drills, weapons systems, emergency recovery maneuvers. Every second in the cockpit demanded full awareness. She had thought the maintenance hangar was pressure. This was different. Here, one mistake could end in smoke and fire. On her first strafing run simulation, Jessica misjudged the attack angle. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared, its recoil shaking the entire frame, but her rounds missed the target by nearly 50 meters. When they landed, Rourke didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just looked at her with cold disappointment. "You think this thing is a toy, Miller?" "No, sir." "Then start flying like your life depends on it, because one day, it will." That night, she stayed in the simulator until 2 a.m., replaying every movement, every mistake, until her hands could feel the angles without thinking. By dawn, when her classmates arrived, she was still there, eyes red, hair tied back, whispering flight patterns to herself like prayers. Weeks turned into months. Jessica improved, not instantly, not easily, but relentlessly. She learned to read the terrain like a living map, to trust the aircraft's weight and quirks, to control her fear when the hog dove toward the desert floor at 400 knots. "Feel the altitude," Rourke barked through the radio. "Don't look at it, feel it." "I feel it, sir," she answered through gritted teeth, pulling hard on the stick as the earth rushed up at her. The altimeter screamed, the horizon tilted, and then she leveled out smooth, skimming a canyon barely 100 feet above the ground. Her heart hammered. Rourke's voice came through after a beat. "That's how you fly the hog." But success came with its shadow. Late one evening, she found a folded message on her locker, a telegram from home. Her father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. For a long time, she didn't move. The words blurred together, and the world felt far away. She took leave for the funeral, standing in her hometown under a sky full of quiet stars. At the service, her mother handed her an old oil-stained cap, her father's mechanic hat, with the faded words, "Engines don't lie." Jessica held it to her chest, whispering, "You were right, Dad. They don't." When she returned to base, something inside her had changed. She wasn't just flying for herself anymore. She was flying for every mechanic who'd ever been underestimated. For her father, for the girl she used to be, for everyone who'd said you can't. The next phase of training was live fire exercises. The range stretched for miles, dusty, brutal, and alive with the echo of gunfire. Jessica's target run was scheduled for 0930 hours. She climbed into her at 10. Call sign Valkyrie 1, heart pounding steady. Copy tower, Valkyrie 1 rolling. The engines thundered as she launched down the runway. The range opened ahead, targets glinting like metal ghosts. "Approach at 15 degrees, Rourke's voice came through the radio. Jessica steadied her breathing. "Roger that." She rolled into the dive, locked onto the target, and pulled the trigger. Brrrt! The cannon's roar shook the desert. Dust exploded from the impact zone. Direct hit. "Holy hell!" Keller's voice crackled through the comms. Maintenance just smoked the target. Jessica laughed, the kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep, fierce, alive. She circled back for another run, each pass smoother, sharper, more confident. When she landed, Rourke was waiting on the tarmac. He didn't say a word, just handed her a patch, the A-10 Squadron insignia. "You've earned it, Lieutenant," he said finally. "Welcome to the Hogs." That night, the entire class celebrated at the base bar. Laughter, music, and stories filled the air. Jessica sat quietly at the edge of the crowd, staring at the patch in her hand. Keller slid into the seat beside her, raising a glass. To the wrench turner who turned out to be a damn good pilot, she smiled, clinking her glass with his. To the hog that taught me how to fight. Fight who? He asked. Everyone who said I couldn't. Later, alone on the flight line, she walked to her jet. The air was still warm, the stars sharp above the desert. She placed her father's hat on the A-10's nose and whispered, "We did it." The metal was cool under her palm, but it thrummed faintly, alive, proud. She closed her eyes, hearing the distant thunder of another aircraft taking off, the same sound she'd fallen in love with as a child. But now it was hers. She had flown through doubt, through exhaustion, through loss, and she was still standing. No longer just maintenance, no longer background noise. She was a pilot, a warrior, and soon she would be something more, because the real test, combat, was still waiting. The desert air in Afghanistan was different, thinner, sharper, carrying the scent of dust and diesel. Jessica stood on the flight line at Bagram Air Base, helmet under her arm, watching the sunrise bleed across the mountains. The A-10s lined up in silhouette, their sharp-toothed noses gleaming in the dawn. It had taken her years to get here. Every rejection, every sleepless night, every drop of sweat, it had all led to this moment. She was finally where she'd always dreamed to be, in a war zone, wearing the patch of a combat pilot. Her call sign was official now, Valkyrie, a nod to the mythic warrior women who chose who would live or die in battle. It fit her more than she cared to admit. Her squadron, the 354th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron, the Bulldogs, was a mix of veterans and rookies. At first, some of the older pilots were skeptical. Word had spread quickly. The new A-10 pilot used to be a mechanic. One afternoon, in the ready room, she caught two of them talking quietly. "Can't believe they're sending maintenance to the front," one muttered. "Yeah," said the other. "Hope she can do more than tighten bolts." Jessica didn't flinch. She just pulled on her flight gloves and walked past them. "Gentlemen," she said, her tone calm but cutting. "Don't worry. If I go down, I'll at least know how to fix it before I crash." A few heads turned. Silence. Then one pilot, Keller, laughed from across the room. "That's my hog driver." Even Rourke, who'd been transferred into command overseas, cracked a smirk. "Let's see if you can back it up in the air, Lieutenant," he said. "I intend to, sir." Her first few missions were routine. Convoy overwatch, reconnaissance, show of force flyovers to deter enemy movement. But nothing about combat was ever truly routine. The radio chatter, the sudden calls for air support, the knowledge that someone below might be dying if she didn't act fast. It all carried a weight training could never replicate. Every sound mattered. Every second counted. One night, they got the call. Valkyrie flight scramble. Troops in contact. Coordinates 42N69E. Possible ambush, heavy fire. Jessica's heart rate spiked. This was it, her first real close air support mission. She sprinted across the tarmac, climbed into her jet, and flipped switches in practiced rhythm. Tower, Valkyrie 1 ready for immediate takeoff. Valkyrie 1 cleared hot. Bring the thunder. The engines roared to life, twin turbines screaming as the hog tore into the dark Afghan sky. The valley below was chaos. Tracer fire, smoke, and flashes of explosions. U.S. forces were pinned down near a ridge. Jessica's HUD lit up with signals and coordinates. Her wingman, Keller, was right beside her. Ground team, Valkyrie flight overhead. Mark your position. A voice crackled through heavy static. Valkyrie, This is Razor 2-1. We've got wounded. Need immediate cover. They're less than 200 meters from us. Jessica's stomach tightened. That was dangerously close. One wrong pass, and she could hit friendly troops. She took a deep breath. Copy, Razor 2-1. Hold your position. We're coming in low. The A-10 dropped to treetop level. Jessica could see the flashes of gunfire below, hear the rattle of bullets against metal as her hog screamed through the canyon. Visual on hostiles. Keller's voice came through. They're on the ridge, north side. You take left, I'll take right. Roger that. Guns hot. She rolled the aircraft into a tight dive. The ground rushed up. Bert. The GIU-8 cannon unleashed its fury, a stream of depleted uranium shells shredding the enemy position. Dust and fire erupted from the impact. Target hit. Target hit. Good effect on target, Keller shouted. She pulled hard, the gi forces pressing her into the seat, heart hammering. Then came the radio again, Razor 2-1's voice, desperate. Valkyrie, we've got enemy trucks moving in from the west. They've got RPGs. Jessica scanned the terrain, spotted them. 3 pickup trucks barreling through the dust. I've got him. Rolling in. She lined up, finger on the trigger. But then, warning tones. Missile lock. Her HUD flashed red. Missile, missile. Brake left. Keller yelled. Jessica yanked the stick, flares bursting behind her. The missile streaked past, exploding harmlessly in the air. Jesus, she muttered, sweat pouring down her neck. That was close. Get back in it, Valkyrie. Rourke's voice came over command radio. The ground needs you. She gritted her teeth. Roger that. She rolled back into the attack. This time, her aim was precise. The first truck exploded in a flash of orange. The second swerved and flipped. The third vanished under a hail of cannon fire. When she climbed back to altitude, the radio was filled with cheers. Valkyrie, Razor 2-1, you just saved our lives. Beautiful work. Jessica let out a shaky breath, staring at the ridgeline below. The adrenaline left her hands trembling. Keller's voice came through, softer now. You good, Miller? Yeah, she said quietly. Just processing. He chuckled. You just wrote yourself into the squadron history books, Valkyrie? Welcome to the war. When they landed back at Bagram, the sun was already rising. Her legs felt weak as she climbed down the ladder. Major Rourke met her at the tarmac, arms crossed. Hell of a first mission. Thank you, sir. He studied her face for a moment, then said, You know what makes a good pilot? Skill? He shook his head. Heart. The plane can do the rest. She smiled faintly. Guess I've got both then. Rourke grinned. Yeah, you've got the hog's heart, stubborn and loud. That night, Jessica sat alone on the roof of the barracks, her flight suit still reeking of fuel and dust. She looked up at the stars, the same ones she used to dream under as a child in Kansas. She thought of her father, her mother, of Lavra Simmons, who had once told her, fly the wing, not the ego. And she thought of the men on the ground who were alive because she didn't freeze, didn't doubt, didn't quit. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything. Not to them. Not to anyone. She had done what she came to do. She had flown through fear and fire and come out the other side whole. A voice called from behind her. Keller again. You planning to sleep at all, Valkyrie? She smiled. Maybe later. He sat beside her, handing her a tin mug of lukewarm coffee. You know, when I first heard your story, the mechanic turned pilot, I thought it was bull. I get that a lot. Not anymore, he said. You earned your wings today. Jessica looked out toward the dark horizon. a faint rumble of distant aircraft humming like thunder. "I didn't just earn them," she said quietly. "I built them." And somewhere far below, soldiers were telling stories about a pilot who flew like lightning and saved them in the dead of night. They didn't know her past, her pain, or her battles. They just knew her call sign, Valkyrie, the woman who could fly the hog. The base had changed since her first mission. The hangars buzzed differently now, the laughter sharper, the salutes crisper, the looks toward Jessica tinged with something new. Respect. It didn't happen overnight, but word had spread fast. The story of Valkyrie, the mechanic who saved an entire platoon with her A-10, made its rounds across units like wildfire. Someone even painted her call sign on the side of her jet in bold white letters, just below the shark teeth. She didn't ask for fame. She only wanted to fly. But war had a way of writing legends, whether you wanted them or not. Still, the nights were heavy. Sometimes she woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the sound of gunfire still echoing in her mind. The smell of smoke, the flashes of light, all too real. She never told anyone. She just woke early, ran laps around the base before dawn, and buried herself in maintenance checks before flight briefings began. It helped her feel grounded, like she was still that same girl turning wrenches in the quiet hangar back home. Because up there, in the sky, everything could disappear in a blink. 2 weeks later, she was called into a mission briefing. Major Rourke stood at the front of the room, map projected across the wall. Intel confirms a downed helicopter, roughly 20 miles east of Kandahar. Hostile territory. Possible survivors. Valkyrie, your lead. Jessica blinked. Lead, sir? Rourke nodded. You've proven you can handle chaos. We're trusting you to keep the search team covered. She glanced at the map again. The area was known for heavy insurgent movement, narrow valleys, high ridges, poor visibility. This is going to be ugly, Keller muttered beside her. Jessica exhaled. Then let's make it fast. They launched before sunrise. 2 hogs cutting through the orange dawn, engines rumbling like thunder across the Afghan desert. As they neared the coordinates, radio chatter flared up. This is Rescue 1. Visual on smoke. Possible survivors. Jessica scanned the terrain below. There it was. A Black Hawk, tail snapped in half. Blackened wreckage surrounded by gunfire. Enemy trucks closing in fast. Rourke was right, she murmured. It's a trap. Rescue 1, Valkyrie flight inbound, she radioed. Get your men ready. We're clearing your path. She dove first, rolling into the attack like a hawk swooping for prey. The GAU-8 cannon screamed, tearing through the enemy trucks with pinpoint precision. Good hits, Keller called. You've got movement near the ridge, RPGs. Jessica banked hard. The ground spun beneath her as she lined up another run. Brrt, smoke and fire erupted. Rescue 1, you're clear to move. Get those survivors out now. Copy, Valkyrie. We're extracting. But as the rescue helicopter lifted off, one of the gunners shouted through the comms, taking heavy fire from the ridge. We're hit. Jessica's eyes shot to the HUD. The Black Hawk's rotor was wobbling, trailing smoke. Damn it, she hissed. They won't make it over the mountain. Keller's voice came in, tense. We've got to suppress that ridge. Too many hostiles, she said. If we hit it blind, we risk hitting them too. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. A narrow canyon running behind the ridge, barely wide enough for a single aircraft. A death trap for most pilots. But she'd flown through worse. She'd trained for low-level evasions that few dared attempt. Valkyrie, what are you doing? Keller asked as her A-10 banked sharply toward the canyon. She smiled tightly. Finishing the job. She dropped into the canyon, the walls so close she could see every scar in the rock. Alarms screamed, altitude warnings, terrain alerts, but she tuned them out. Her focus narrowed to a razor's edge. One pass, one chance. She came out behind the ridge, right on top of the insurgents' position. They never saw her coming. Guns hot, she whispered. The GLU-8 roared to life again, and the ridge erupted. Enemy fire vanished beneath her onslaught. When she pulled up, the Black Hawk was clear, its pilot struggling to keep it airborne. "Valkyrie, this is Rescue One," came the strained voice over comms. "You just saved our asses. We're RTB with survivors." Jessica let out a long breath. "Good work, Rescue One. See you home." But then, warning tone. Her HUD blinked red. "Missile lock." Keller shouted, "Brake right." She jerked the stick, but too late. The missile streaked toward her. Impact. A flash of light. The aircraft jolted violently. "Valkyrie, you hit?" Keller's voice roared through the radio. Smoke filled the cockpit. Panels sparked. Jessica coughed, trying to steady the plane. "Yeah, I'm hit. Right engine's gone. Eject, damn it." She glanced down. Her ejection handle glowed like a promise of escape. But the hog was still flying, still fighting to live. "I'm not leaving her," she said through gritted teeth. She shut down the damaged engine, rerouted power, and forced the plane into a slow climb. The left turbine screamed, but held. "Come on, girl," she muttered. "Don't die on me now." The base was 30 miles away, an eternity in a crippled at 10. Every alarm in the cockpit was screaming. The controls fought back, the airframe trembling with each gust. Her breathing slowed. Focus returned. Years of maintenance experience flashed through her mind. Every hydraulic line, every redundant system, every emergency patch she'd ever done in the hangar. Now it was her life depending on it. She rerouted pressure manually, isolating the damaged lines. The hog leveled out, limping but alive. "Valkyrie, we've got you on radar," Rourke's voice broke through. "You're trailing smoke. Can you make it?" "Affirmative, sir," she replied, steady but strained. "One engine, partial hydraulics. But she's flying." Rourke chuckled softly through the static. "Of course she is. You built her to survive." When she finally touched down, sparks flew from the right wing as it scraped the tarmac. The hog rolled to a halt, cockpit shrouded in steam. Ground crews rushed in, shouting. Jessica popped the canopy, climbed out, and stood atop the damaged jet, bruised, shaking, but smiling. Keller landed seconds later, running toward her. "You're insane." "Probably," she said, laughing breathlessly. But it worked. Rourke arrived, eyes wide at the wreckage. "You brought that thing home on one engine?" "Yes, sir." He looked at the ruined plane, then back at her. "You just proved why we fly the hog." Then, softer. "You did good, Lieutenant. Damn good." That night, Jessica sat by the hangar again. The moonlight poured through the broken panels, glinting off the wounded A-10 she refused to abandon. Her hand rested on the cool metal, tracing the bullet holes and burn marks. "You and me," she whispered. "We're not done yet." A week later, Rourke called her into the command tent. The room fell silent when she entered. At the center of the table lay a framed photo, the rescue team she'd saved. 6 soldiers, all alive, holding a sign that read, "Thank you, Valkyrie." Rourke cleared his throat. "The Air Force has approved your Distinguished Flying Cross." She blinked, stunned. "Sir, you earned it," he said simply. "And for what it's worth, every pilot here voted for it." The room erupted in applause. For the first time, Jessica didn't hide her tears. Because she realized something. She wasn't just maintenance anymore. She wasn't trying to prove herself. She was the real thing, a combat pilot, a rescuer, a warrior in her own right. That night, standing under the endless Afghan sky, she looked up at the stars again. This time, she didn't feel small. She felt infinite, because she had flown through fear, fire, and doubt, and found herself on the other side of it all. She whispered into the wind, "Dad, I did it." And somewhere far off, the hog she'd saved stood silent, waiting for her next flight, battle-scarred, unbreakable, and beautiful. Just like her. 6 months later, the war faded into the rhythm of rotation. Deployment over. Bags packed. Jets shipped home. For the first time in years, the sky over Afghanistan was quiet for Jessica Miller. When her boots hit U.S. soil again, the silence felt heavier than the war ever had. No gunfire. No radios. No endless roar of engines. Just quiet. But peace was something you had to learn, and she wasn't sure she remembered how. The day she landed at Nellis Air Force Base, the hangar was full of familiar faces, mechanics, pilots, commanders, and a few civilians holding banners. "Welcome home, Valkyrie." Someone handed her a flag folded neatly into a triangle. Another saluted her, a young airman with grease on his hands. "Ma'am," he said shyly, "I used to work maintenance too. Before I started flight school. I heard your story. You made me believe I could." Jessica smiled faintly. "Then don't stop believing. That's half the battle." The young man grinned and nodded, as if she'd just handed him the keys to his own destiny. It struck her, how words, like flight, carried power. Weeks passed. Life slowed down, but Jessica didn't. She spent her mornings at the base gym, her afternoons helping at the flight simulator, where new recruits trained. Every time she stepped into that dark room and saw the glowing controls, she remembered her own beginning, the nights she'd snuck into empty hangars just to dream. Now she guided others through that same dream. "Don't fight the plane," she told one nervous cadet. "Feel it. Trust it. The hog's tough. She'll take care of you if you respect her." The cadet nodded, gripping the stick too tightly. Jessica leaned closer, her voice calm. "And remember, the moment you stop thinking you can't, that's when you start flying." One afternoon, she visited the restoration hangar where her damaged A-10 had been shipped. It stood there, repaired but scarred, gleaming beneath the soft light, tail number A10C, 221. Her hog, the same aircraft that had taken her through fire and brought her home alive. Technicians were working on her, polishing the metal and checking the systems. Jessica placed her hand on the nose, just below the painted shark teeth. "She's the one from Kandahar, right?" one mechanic asked. Jessica nodded. "Yeah, she saved more lives than she was ever built to." The man smiled. "We call her Valkyrie's wing now. That's what the guys started saying after your rescue mission." Jessica blinked, caught between pride and disbelief. Her plane had a name now. Her name. At night, when the base was quiet, she sometimes drove out to the end of the runway and watched the training flights. Jets roared overhead, leaving trails of silver in the sunset. Each one reminded her of the friends she'd flown with, Keller, Rourke, the soldiers she'd saved, and the ones she couldn't. War never left completely. It lingered, quiet but heavy, like the hum of an engine that refused to shut off. But she learned to live with it. Then, one morning, Rourke appeared at her office door. He'd been promoted, his uniform sharper than ever, but the same grin creased his face. "Still can't sit still, huh?" he said. She laughed. "I don't know how." He tossed a folder on her desk. "Good, because I've got something for you." She opened it, a new set of orders. Instructor Pilot Program. Davis Mountain AFB, Arizona. She looked up, stunned. You want me to train pilots? Not me, Rock said. The Air Force does. You've earned it, Jess. They want you teaching the next generation how to fly the Hog. For a long moment, she just stared at the papers. The ink crisp, official, almost unreal. Then she smiled. Guess the sky's not done with me yet. Months later, Arizona heat replaced Afghan dust. The flight line shimmered in the sun, the familiar snarl of a 10 engines echoing across the desert. Jessica stood beside a young lieutenant, her student, helmet under his arm, nerves written all over his face. You ready for your first leave-fire run? She asked. He nodded. If you are, ma'am. Jessica smirked. Trust me, Lieutenant. The Hog bites harder than anything you'll face out there. Just remember what she likes, and don't make her angry. They both laughed, the tension easing. Moments later, the two A-10s lifted off together, a sound rolling like thunder across the sky. At altitude, the radio crackled. Valkyrie, this is Titan 1. You ever get tired of this? Jessica looked out over the vast desert, the endless horizon painted gold and crimson. No, she said softly. You don't get tired of something that saved your life. She banked left, sunlight flashing across her canopy. The air was smooth, steady, alive. Below her, the desert stretched endlessly, and she felt that familiar rush, that unity between woman and machine, sky and soul. The Hog rumbled beneath her, as loyal as ever. It wasn't just an aircraft. It was a piece of her story. When they landed, the students cheered. One of them shouted, "You made it look easy, ma'am." Jessica laughed. If it looks easy, that means you're doing it right. But later that night, alone in her quarters, she pulled out a letter from a small wooden box. It was worn, edges yellowed, a note from her father before he'd passed. Never let them tell you what you can't do, Jess. You were born to fix things, maybe even the sky. She smiled through the tears. Guess you were right, Dad. The next morning, a reporter visited the base for a feature on female pilots. They wanted to interview her, the former mechanic who became one of the Air Force's most decorated A-10 drivers. Jessica hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. The young woman journalist asked softly, "When they said you were just maintenance, what made you believe you could fly?" Jessica paused, eyes glancing toward the runway where her Hog was parked, glinting under the sun. "I didn't believe," she said finally. "I knew." The reporter frowned slightly. "Knew what?" Jessica smiled, a small, calm smile that carried years of battles, triumphs, and scars. "That I wasn't born to watch the sky," she said. "I was born to chase it." Months later, her students graduated, their wings pinned proudly to their uniforms. Jessica stood in the back of the ceremony, watching them salute, the echo of her own journey reflected in their eyes. Rourke found her afterward, hands in his pockets. "You look proud," he said. "I am," she replied. "They'll take the Hog farther than we ever did." He nodded. "You realize you've changed the game, right? There'll be girls and boys who'll grow up hearing your story. They'll know the sky's big enough for all of them." Jessica looked up, the faint roar of jets above filling the air. "Good," she whispered. "That's how it should be." Later that night, she returned to the hangar one last time. The moonlight bathed her old A-10, Valkyrie's wing, in silver. She climbed onto the ladder, resting her palm on the cockpit frame. "Hey, old girl," she whispered. "We did all right, didn't we?" The wind rustled through the hangar, quiet but warm. She smiled, knowing somewhere, somehow, the sky still remembered her name. They had called her just maintenance. They had laughed when she said she wanted to fly. But now, she was legend. The woman who flew through fear, through fire, and proved that courage isn't born in the cockpit. It's built on the ground, piece by piece, by those who refuse to quit. And when she finally walked away that night, the faint echo of turbines hummed in the air, like a heartbeat, like a promise, like the sound of freedom itself. Because Jessica Miller, Valkyrie, could fly the hog, and she always would.